So now we're going to step back out a little bit, and I want everyone to close their eyes for a couple seconds. Philip, you're not closing your eyes. And envision your perfect stream, right? Just take a couple seconds and think about what a perfect stream is to you. All right, once everyone has that sight image in mind, we're going to go on to the next slide. And so you might have envisioned something kind of like this, you know, a meandering single thread stream through a beautiful landscape. You know, there might be a lot of water that is only relegated to the channel. And that is very true for a lot of our streams. And, you know, the streams I grew up playing in looked like that. And so that's what I thought was a pristine stream. However, the first European colonists to this land saw something a lot different. They were seeing really messy systems full of wood jams. Water was spread all throughout the floodplain. There wasn't a single channel that was the main stem. It was all throughout the valley bottoms. And one of the key features of this landscape was that beavers were ubiquitous on it. They were everywhere, but it's not like that anymore. So we're resetting this idea of what a healthy river looks like. And this is a current example that might be a really good reference site. So you can see this really big swampy wetland, and you can't really make out a single channel in it. You know, there are a couple threads throughout, but it's really spread out through this wide valley bottom. And you can tell that there's a lot of water on the landscape and that the floodplain is well connected. Now, while this site looks really awesome and is certainly full of beavers, it still has some ailments. You can see these two roads that are bounding the stream into that confined valley, and so it can't make full use of its floodplain. So what happened? Well, a couple hundred years ago, in the 1800s, there was unregulated trapping throughout all of North America, and that depressed beaver populations. Pre-European contact, there were around 60 to 400 million beavers. That is an unimaginable number of animals. And you would have to think that every stream that could support a beaver likely had a beaver in it. And that's a lot more wood and stuff in the streams that the beavers are adding. By 1900, though, there were only about 100,000 beavers left. Luckily, beavers are pretty prolific animals, like all rodents, and so that they've rebounded a little bit. And right now, their population sits around 10 million and is still growing. Now, you might ask yourself, or you might already know, why were beavers trapped so intensely? Well, it was the fur trade. Beavers, if you can look to our friends here, they have really soft, thick, double-layered, luxurious fur. And that was really fashionable in Europe back in the 1800s. So to satisfy this intense fur appetite of Europe, hundreds and thousands of trappers colonized the West, or colonized all of North America, starting in the East, moving west to procure this fur, to make it into felt, to then make it into hats for European, you know, fancy people.
Should we pass around the beaver so everyone can?
Sure. The little beaver or the big beaver?
One, the big one.
Okay. All right.
Delicate. Just be gentle with it. We're all adults here, but you know.
Am I
just pass it around?
Pass it around. It's pretty light. Pretend the beaver is swimming through you and you are just a beaver pond. And so, you know, the fur trade didn't last forever, right? You know, there aren't still thousands and thousands of trappers out there making a living off of fur. And that's for a couple reasons, right? By 1900, only 100,000 beavers were left, but also beaver fur fell out of fashion in Europe. It's primarily silk hats that became the real big fancy thing. And there was another reason too that they were trapping these beavers, especially in the Northwest. The Hudson Bay Company wanted to create a fur desert. They wanted to get rid of all valuable fur so that other settlers would not be encouraged to settle there. And so that they would have this big swath of land that would be undesirable for new European contact.
Yeah, great. So just like was mentioned before, it's well worth mentioning again, not only were beavers removed from the landscape, but the original stewards of this land, the Pasquosa or Wenatchee people. The best place to learn about them is from themselves. They have a wonderful, robust website that I encourage everyone to check out. There's a really good 1-hour documentary about the removal and relocation and the reservation that was promised multiple times and never was delivered. Both the Confederated Colville Tribe and Yakima Nation have robust natural resource departments that are contributing greatly to the resources that they've managed for thousands of years. So once again, encourage everyone to check out their websites and learn more about them. They have divisions in our area too. They're doing really great work. So, we're talking a little bit about the past. We're going to go through just some series of photos to give everyone some ideas. Our earliest photos, and this is a postcard drawing, but you really can't find anything for this area that's before the 1900s. So if you think about kind of what Michael was saying, the fur trade, that was the 1800s, So we're already experiencing over 100 years of human disturbance before we have photo documentation. Of course, we have oral histories, but, a photo is worth 1,000 words, right? So here's Leavenworth town, 1910, and you can see how wet this landscape is. Look at all that water over in East Leavenworth. You can see the dam that was built over in the left-hand corner, but that river takes up a lot of space. And I'm sure some of y'all in here know this a lot better than I. And if y'all do, I'd love to have coffee with y'all sometime. But I love hearing about people's stories of the stories that they've heard all their lives. So one of those other big disturbances was the railroad. 1892, the railroad went in over Stevens Pass and came over in Leavenworth. This is not Stevens Pass. There's, kind of a mix of what you get with photos when you're looking at historical. This is Stampede Pass over in the 90 corridor now, but it still paints a really good photo of what kind of land movement happened. And it's amazing the amount of land that was moved and the trees that were cut down and all the things, but wow. And then also, I thought this photo was really great too. You can see the creek. And so it's been straightened, dredged, and narrowed so that it doesn't impede, where we don't want it, basically. So I have some more good historical photos. Hopefully everyone likes those. Here's another one. Most of them are Leavenworth area. Here's Tumwater Dam. This was prior to the road. So the railroad is there in the photo. But you can see, Michael was talking about how there was a lot more wood in the system. Now this wood is probably from the mill, but pre-settlement, we probably would have seen bigger log jams that we just do not see today on our river systems. And then in the late 20s, of course, the Chumstick Tunnel was put in. So they redirected the railroad up the Chumstick. Lots of land movement there, which is a lot of the areas that we work is that Chumstick drainage watershed, which is why I wanted to talk about it a bit. In this photo, just notice, you can see it pretty well, but just once again, this kind of swath of clearing and land movement. This is Peshastin. So one thing that kind of blows my mind is the railroad trestles, they're backfilled with fill. So this is land that they're building up tens of feet, maybe even taller than that, which I think is really hard for us to conceptualize today. Not only where did this fill come from, but just the amount of elevation that was gained in that. So really interesting photos again. And then here again is the Chumstick. And once again, just wanted to reiterate the amount of soil that was moved to build up those railroad lines and the landscape that was changed. This giant drainage area, water basin, cut in half by the railroad. Once again, these are some advertisements from the 30s. Come on over the Columbia Valley. It's a great place to develop. So really emphasizing this, like westward expansion idea. We do have a lot of wonderful resources here, of course, which people have been utilizing for thousands of years, but in a different way than we decided to use them. And then even in the 1940s, we knew dams were a problem and were depleted. In the 40s, we were seeing our fisheries being depleted. a couple more photos, just bear with me. They're so interesting. Red Bridge, right? And most of these photos, they came from the Washington State Historical Society or the University of Washington's digital collection. But yeah, pretty cool. And this was pre the road. It was just the railroad that accessed here.
Was that in Canada? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Red Bridge. Yeah. We're all probably all pretty familiar. So here we are today, though, in Leavenworth. And so once again, if you recall that first photo of just that wet valley wide river space, what we see today is very different.
And so, you know, the development has happened. People are now on the landscape. And when settlers were coming out here, they encountered a fir desert. There were, you know, these really great, flat, fertile wetland habitat areas that weren't occupied by beavers. Beaver dams went into disrepair, they broke, and what was left was perfect farmland. And that's, you know, so applicable to the Wenatchee Valley. We see the orchards that frame our rivers and streams around here, and that was great for the settlers. However, beavers are rebounding, and I want you to take a second and appreciate how cute a baby beaver is. This set of game camera photos is from a relocation site from our project. So the beavers are successfully reproducing, which is just so wonderful. But
on that note, it seems like y'all could handle the big beaver. Do we want to pass around the baby beaver too? The fur is really different. It doesn't have the same waterproofing properties yet. So just be real gentle with it.
Right. So these settlers came in, they found these wetlands unoccupied, and they set up shop and started farming and making their lives here. But now beavers are rebounding. And a stream that was attractive to a beaver 500 years ago is still attractive to a beaver now. They're flat, low gradient, plenty of water, and someone stocked their pantry for them with a bunch of nice fruit wood, right? So the beavers are coming in saying, heck yeah, and they're starting to set up shop. When you're in the business of growing trees, you're going to have conflicts with animals in the business of eating them. So we're going to have to do
a
switcheroo.
Yeah.
I have this great video from one of our trapping sites where a beaver bashfully, well, I'll let you watch.
Ready?
I'll let you watch. It's
We
great.
can watch it a couple times
Yeah.
if we need to.
The beaver grabs a pear and then bashfully runs away like it knows it's not supposed to have it, but it cannot stay away.
We'll watch it one more
Let's watch it again. It's great.
And there it goes.
Right. So beavers are moving back in. They're like, heck yeah, this is a great spot for me to set up. And the people disagree. And that presents, oh, let it get back to the present mode. You got it.
How do you do? Oh, here.
Right there. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. So that means that there is a problem that needs solved, and that's where the beaver projects come in. So like Lisa said earlier, I work for the Wenatchee-Entiat Beaver Project, and we're here to be agents to provide solutions to beaver conflict. When people have an issue with a beaver on their land, chewing their trees, flooding their property, they'll call us. And this is a program that was started in 2018 by Trout Unlimited and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here in Leavenworth. And so we're providing landowners with beaver conflict solutions in order to allow them to coexist together. And then if coexistence can't work, then we might have to relocate them. And this relocation provides a really interesting opportunity for us. I mentioned earlier how beavers are ecosystem engineers. And so we have an opportunity to take these beavers and move them places where they're going to do really good work. And so here's just some examples of, well, here's one example of beaver coexistence, one example of beaver not coexistence. So when beavers are chewing trees, we can throw up a quick cage around them and they won't chew it anymore. However, not every situation can be solved with a few cages. If you look at these boxes, those were once cherry saplings, and about 80 of them were chewed down in one night by a pair of beavers. That hurts the wallet of an orchardist. And obviously, you know, the beaver loves it. The orchardists were actually really cool about it, and they love the beavers too. but they just couldn't live together. And that's where we came in. And we came in and we trapped them and were able to relocate them. So I talked a little bit about trapping, and you may be wondering, how do we catch our beavers? So we use something called a suitcase trap, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's a metal trap that looks like a suitcase. And we use these things called commercial trapping lures. So one thing about beavers, they're super pheromone motivated and they're really territorial to other beavers, right? So they build these mud mounds on the side of a creek. That's their message to other beavers saying, hey, this is my spot. So we come in with this commercial trapping lure that smells like that message from another beaver, and we're putting it on our traps. So a beaver might be swimming around and they'll sniff something and say, who the hell is that guy? Swim up to the trap, go to mess them up, get in the trap, and that's how we'll catch them. However, beavers aren't going to go way out of their way to go sniff a trap and lure. So we really have to scout their movements and pattern them in so that we can know where to put our traps. And we check them, we're really diligent about checking them. We're always keeping animal welfare in mind when we're handling them. So many of you may know that the Leavenworth National Fish Hatchery is our beaver holding facility. So we keep them for a short period of time, mainly so that we can catch every member of their family, because they do a lot better when we release them together. We feed them every day. We make sure they're receiving a constant flow of fresh water. And we're really, making sure that these beavers are doing well. Sometimes I view them as like my children. I'm so proud of them when we can release them and that they're building great dams and they're doing a really great job in the stream. So I am, so worried about them whenever we have them in our care. So the fun part, beaver relocation. We want to release beavers as a mated pair or as a family. If you were tossed in the middle of nowhere by yourself, you'd be pretty freaked out and probably try to find some other people. But if you got a couple buddies or something, you're probably going to stick where you are and try to figure it out. So we prep the site prior to release. We'll make a makeshift lodge for them so that they have a immediate place to get cover. They never really use it. They probably look at it and say, what kind of beaver built this? And then we place game cameras at the site in order to track them, to see if they're staying around, see what's going on, or to see if they leave the site. And we can learn a lot from that. A site that might look really good to us might not look so good to a beaver. And so throughout years of this project, releasing in different locations, we're building this body of knowledge so that we can choose better relocation sites. We also really rely on a model, and I'm not going to get too far into it, but it helps to rank our streams so that we can determine from a remote venue what streams we'd want to go survey for beaver release. And then, we release them in the morning, give them the whole day to figure it out. But we're going to go into more. I talked about this earlier. I've been alluding to it the whole time. Beavers are ecosystem engineers, and please appreciate the great meme. Beavers are super industrious creatures, right? They hear the flowing water and they have to dam it. I'm sure you've seen the videos of beavers pulling dog toys into door frames in people's houses. So they're just so in tune with flow of fluids, whether that's air or water, and they're trying to plug that up. And unlike most animals, beavers modify their environment. So they're building their dams, they're building their lodges, they're burrowing, they're doing a lot of stuff to the environment that many other organisms don't do. And they can turn habitat that might not be so good into really awesome wetland habitat just by building some dams, not just for themselves, but also for other wildlife species. So why do beavers build dams? Beavers are really agile in the water. I don't know if any of you have seen a beaver swimming around, or if you look at this beaver, it's, set out ready to swim, and they're really fast in the water.
This is a roadkill beaver, so it kind of tells you a little telling. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So they're pretty awkward on land, as that can show you. And, a really great term that I learned in college is that beavers are milk duds of the forest. They're these little balls of fat and everything loves to eat them. I'm talking bears, cougars, wolves. They don't really catch a break. And that's why they have to modify their environment. They want to have as much water as they can have to swim in to be safe from predators. So they build these dams and pound a ton of water. And it's kind of their moat for their castle, right? And so these ponds provide better access for food to beavers. And beavers will also dig really intense networks of canals. I don't know if anyone's walked around in a beaver wetland, but you'll be walking and then you'll be 3 feet deeper all of a sudden because you fall straight down into one of these canals. And so they do all of this, modification to their environment to make themselves safer. And then we have another video. Do we have to exit out for this one? Yeah. Okay. So this one's still pretty cute, but less cute. Oh, don't look. This is later. Okay. So I can play it a couple times, but here's a video of a beaver at one of our trapping sites that's building a dam. And if you were looking at the beaver as you were passing it around, you notice how they have really small dexterous paws. And that's because they're manipulating things like sticks and mud and grass and stuff into their dams so that they can create a really watertight seal. Yeah, it's just a super neat video to watch an animal that is pretty, you know, hard to see doing their behavior. Yeah. We'll watch it one more time. All right.
They're so cute.
Yeah, you know, just doing their job.
Good.
That.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking a lot about beaver food. And so beavers kind of farm their food, right? I see beavers as farmers. And so by building these dams, they're pushing so much water out onto the floodplain that they're wetting all of this area. They're killing off the upland species that they don't eat, like ponderosa pine or other conifers, and in their place grow these really nice, thick complexes of deciduous vegetation like willow. This is a historic beaver complex. So the beavers no longer inhabit this, but the benefits last far beyond the beavers, even if they leave. But you can just see how full it is of this really awesome food material for beavers. Beavers do more than just things for themselves. So if you can think back to that single thread stream we saw at the beginning of the presentation, with the upland species encroaching in, you'll have a beaver build a dam in one of these channels, and over a long time, this dam system will help reconnect that stream to its floodplain. If you look in this figure, you can see how that blue line across the bottom represents the water table. And so as the beavers build their dams and they blow out, widens the floodplain, and as they keep building, they're grading sediment behind their dams, because as the water comes into the ponds, they slow down. And so all those suspended solids start to fall out of suspension, and they'll build up. And over a long period of time, and you know, in certain systems, it happens relatively quickly, you'll build an incised channel back up to its historic floodplain. And then you can see how just diverse the plant community is when it has so much water spread out over the floodplain, and you have all these meandering threads throughout a much larger area. It also helps to slow water down in the system. I was on a workshop a few weeks ago, and one of the presenters there had a really awesome line. It was Dr. Joe Wheaton, and he said, inefficient conveyance is healthy for wetland systems. So by slowing the water down, you're keeping the water there longer. So a lot of our streams that run dry in the summertime, if they had a lot more obstacles in the way, that water might have a longer residence time in the stream. But by the history of mismanagement and, you know, stream cleaning and ditching and straightening, removing all of those obstructions, water doesn't hang around long in the system. It enters the stream, and then it's downstream into, you know, the Icicle, Wenatchee, then Columbia into the ocean. So by putting these beavers back on the landscape, we're restoring these historic processes, these historic functions, giving the stream the tools it needs to heal itself by slowing down the water, by regrading the sediment, and a whole host of other impacts. Now, beyond just, you know, the plant communities, beavers are really essential to fish. A lot of people think a beaver dam might be a fish passage barrier to a salmon, but that's not the case. There's a really great line, and I don't remember where it came from, but beavers taught salmon how to jump. You know, they've co-evolved together over millennia. So they've lived on the same landscape for longer than we've lived on the landscape with them. And so beavers, by building their dams, creating this awesome wetland habitat, one, they're creating refugia for the fish. They're creating these deep pools of water that are cooler. They have temperature gradients. where fish can overwinter or over summer, especially for juveniles, which are especially vulnerable. There's a lot of rough edge habitat. You got all those sticks, all those canals, all of this emergent vegetation growing, providing this really great escape cover for them. And then they're also creating, a gradient of sediment. I said earlier how like sediment will fall out of suspension. So the heavier stuff falls out sooner. And as you go down through the pond, you're getting a different size particle of sediment. And so a whole, host of species can use different parts of a beaver pond, both from a sediment gradient and from a temperature gradient. So you're getting a really great diversity of not just fish and beavers and amphibians and all other wildlife, but also a lot of insects that help to support these food webs. And now beavers can combat climate change, right? Wetlands are super important carbon sinks. And throughout this country, beyond just losing beavers, we've lost a ton of our wetlands since colonization. I think it's something close to 90 or 95% following the American Revolution. Colonists would see a wet spot and think, I need to drain that and build a house there. And unfortunately, they were pretty successful. Beaver ponds have been shown to increase water storage and decrease water temperature, which is going to be so important with the advance of global climate change. As winter precipitation starts falling more as rain rather than snow, we're going to have less of a snowpack. And so by relocating beavers high into the watershed, we're creating these stores of water that can slowly release the water throughout the year. And then also because the water isn't just staying in that pond and dumping over the dam, there's a lot of exchange with groundwater. So a lot of the water flowing through a beaver pond is actually going into the ground, cooling, and then exiting below the dam. And so in that way, beavers are going to be really key players in our climate resiliency going forward. Now, speaking more to climate change, and I think everyone can say that we're experiencing more severe and more frequent wildfires. Beavers are really important actors in buffering the effects of these wildfires. And I think this picture from Fairfax and Whittle 2020 does a great job of showing how a beaver pond can protect these systems. So if you look over on your right, you see a system that was completely burned. It didn't have any beavers in it. And so the wildfire was able to just jump straight over the creek. It didn't matter, that there was water there. It was able to blast right through. But where you have a beaver complex, you have so much more water. There's more water in the vegetation and there's more water in the groundwater, and the water table is higher. So once the wildfire hits that beaver complex, hits that wet riparian vegetation, it's kind of stopped in its tracks. And, I think a lot of people can look around the mountains here and see how burned they are. After a burn, you lose a lot of your trees, lose a lot of your vegetation. And with that, you're losing a lot of your sediment. So if we get a big pulse of rain, you're also getting a big pulse of sediment into our streams. And beaver dams, we saw how earlier they were grading those channels are grading sediment behind the dams. There are nets in our streams to catch that sediment. And, we can almost use it as a tool with how bad wildfires are and with how bad erosion is. If we have these structures in place, by catching that sediment, we can help reverse it. And so we can't always relocate beavers to every streams. They might just not have the best habitat. They might have, orchards or something nearby. And so we don't want to create conflict where we don't need to. So we'll try our best to be beavers, and we'll build beaver dam analogues. And we do this by pounding posts in the stream and weaving them like a basket. And these do the same things that beaver dams do. Maybe not as well as a beaver dam, but we try our best. And so a really great example, hearkening back to the CRM that we talked about in the first slide, are our Potato Creek BDAs. So Potato Creek is a tributary to the Entiat River and is a really important steelhead stream. And so these were implemented. The first phase was implemented in the fall of 2020. A second phase has since been completed in the fall of 2022. Second phase was led by Cascadia Conservation District, and the first phase was led by Trout Unlimited. And so you can see how right after weaving, there's a little bit of a pool behind them, but you really see the benefit when we go to the next slide, and we'll see what they look like the following spring. So these are the same BDAs. And if you paid attention, so I'll go back, so pay attention to this log here, right on that left picture. So you can see how it's already starting to get buried a little bit in sediment, right? So if people know the Potato Creek drainage, it was burned by the Cougar Creek fire. And so there's a lot of sediment to be donated in that system. And now if we go to this winter of 2023, here's that same BDA that was on the left. You can see those logs are fully mired in the sediment. And if you didn't see those posts there, you'd probably think it was a real beaver dam. So like we had mentioned earlier, we're restoring these processes to the stream. We're giving them the tools so that these structures are just going to become features of the stream again, and it won't even look like we've been there. And so because we call them beaver dam analogs, we're trying to pay homage to the animals that are the greatest wetland builders, right? We're trying to emulate what they're doing in our structures for success. So if you look at a beaver dam, they're more three-dimensional than two-dimensional. They have a lot of things going on, a lot of sticks, and a lot of volume and surface area on them. And so when we're building our BDAs, we're building them messy too. We're building them really wide. We're building them almost like a trapezoidal shape so that we're going to slow down the water, cause a lot of, complexity to the flow. And so by doing that, we're slowing the water down, reducing the power of the stream so that our structures are going to be effective. And so we're really putting our thinking caps on, trying to be a beaver when we're in the stream. And would you look at that happy beaver standing proud next to his dam?
That's good. I was going to use another photo I had of Michael, and I'm glad I didn't now. But
No, you shouldn't.
you should have, apparently. Great. So my job might not be as sexy as Michael's. I don't get to work directly with beavers, but I do get to learn from great people like Michael and Lisa and from the beavers themselves in doing the role of the conservation district, where we're trying to conserve soil and water in Chelan County. And so my job is to do riparian restoration, which a lot of people are like, riparian, what is that word? So it's any around water bodies, the land that's adjacent to them. And so what we're doing when we're doing riparian restoration is a couple different things. There's a lot going on in our world today, right? And so one of the things we are trying to do is restore to the historical condition, because it is so broken, like we saw from those historical photos. And we know, because we don't have fish in our systems anymore, we don't have water year round. Potato Creek used to be perennial. Now, sometimes it runs dry. Same with a lot of our other systems up here in the Wenatchee watershed. But we're trying to balance that. I mean, we all live here. I live right next to a creek, like some of the other people in the room. And where does that leave us? We have our roads. We need them to get to places. So how do we balance restoring to the historical with our current infrastructure and future development, and then throw climate change in there? All these things we're trying to keep in mind. And, these beaver-powered restoration solutions seem like a good, way to go about doing some of this work. So our riparian buffers that we focus on planting, they're usually 15 to 100 feet wide, depending on the landowner, the land use. Anything is better than nothing. You'll see some pictures later of some of our systems that have no buffers. And these buffers, they do a variety of things. They trap harmful chemicals and sediment, slow it down, providing shade to our creeks and streams and rivers. And they're also wildlife corridors. Here's just a diagram of a riparian buffer along a stream, just talking about their great solution to some of our water quality issues. I mentioned earlier that we work a lot on the Chumstick watershed, which is very water quality limited. There's excess amounts of E. coli, nitrogen, phosphorus, and of course, excess temperature. I don't know why that was a slow transition. Here is a section of the Little Chumstick where you can see there's absolutely, the vegetation along the side of the creek is reed canary grass, which is a non-native species. And this single threaded channel is completely dominated by the reed canary grass. There is one small hawthorn hanging in there. But, these are our systems that we as the conservation district try to work at. No beaver in their right mind would ever live here. But what can we do that maybe in the future one might consider it? So this is that same site where we put in BDAs. You can see that lonely hawthorn in that back left corner in our BDAs, and already the stream is widening. You see a lot of weird sticks in the ground. Those are willow and cottonwood stakes. And then, of course, this is spring, so there's no leaves on it, but here in a couple weeks, hopefully we'll start seeing that vegetation kind of pop up. And the idea is that we're putting those stakes, we just want to shade the creek in this scenario. It's full sun, it does dry out. The BDAs though, this last fall when we had like no rain at all for so long and it was so hot, they were pooling and holding water, which is pretty cool. And then here's a little closer up to the BDAs, how you can kind of see they're pooling, widening the creek, slowing it down. And also the idea too is like they're going to water these plants that we do plant in the ground. So it's benefiting all these great plants that we're trying to restore in the riparian area. And then our streams are incised. Like Michael was talking about, they're really disconnected from the floodplain, due to erosion over time. So incised is just a fancy word for rivers that have eroded the landscape and they become trapped in these channels. It's just a good visual of streams without beavers. You can see how disconnected the stream or river is from the vegetation and floodplain. We're on the right. Once again, we're slowing that water down, pulling it. And here it's a higher water table. We have water for longer. Here's some other pictures of some of our planting sites on the Little Chumstick. These streams are very incised. If you were standing in the stream, it comes about up to my chest to the creek. So we are planting these now, and then in June, we'll be installing BDAs here. I think there'll be a lot of benefits for this system. Here you can't, this is also on Little Chumstick. Some of y'all might recognize this area, but these are also incised channels. This is high water, so we could go now, or this week actually, high water in this channel, and you can see there's no way that water is going to jump over that bank and spread out. We're planting on that top right corner to enhance. There's no big trees in this section too. It's basically the same shrub species. We're trying to get some bigger trees in there to add more woody debris to the system over time. And you can't really tell, but the Chumstick and like a lot of our upper Wenatchee creeks, we have a lot of Western cedar, Potato Creek actually too, that oftentimes people don't think that Western cedar grows there. Well, it does, it did, it used to be pretty abundant in our area because we do have these wet systems. So here's just some more photos. This is on Mainstem Chumstick. This was spring of 2020, and this was this current spring. So both high water. So I wanted to make sure to show like high water. And the BDA is, it's not raising the water level so much. We're not flooding things due to kind of our permitting limitations. We can't be beavers. And we don't always want to be because we want to live in our systems. But it is slowing the water down and pooling it and reconnecting it with that floodplain though. It is reaching the top and going out. Here's some more slides. I just wanted to show more projects that we're doing. The first photo on the left, once again, it's a reed canary dominated system. That reed canary, that's me. So it was as tall as me as I was cutting it. You can't see the water in Eagle Creek here. Photo number 2, you're starting to kind of see the definition of the channel. We brush cut it the whole area. Photo number 3, we put in our BDA posts. And photo number 4, the BDA posts are woven and the area is planted. So kind of a start to finish. Well, we still have a couple years of maintenance here, but start to kind of putting in the process base, restoring the system so that it can restore itself. We have like really wonderful partners that we mentioned, but we also work with some really great people in the community. Discovery High School has been so helpful to us, and we love working with them as we're working with our next generation of practitioners. So really cool to work with these students. They're so awesome. They helped us put a lot of plants in the ground, as well as helped with the weaving. This is also Eagle Creek where we're weaving the BDAs there. These are all the same area on Eagle Creek. And this was this spring. So you can see that water level once again, the BDA posts are almost topped out by the water level. And really that's starting to spread out on the floodplain for our plants. So Washington Conservation Corps was helping us plant here last fall so that our plants can get watered and we have to irrigate them less. Here's some other great sites. So this is one great visual from 2016. We planted this site. And then the next one is after all the plants were in the ground. And then 2020, we put in our BDA posts and then our BDA. Oh, and then look at this, 5 years and the vegetation is high. It's all above our heads. That's all this stuff that they're planting there. You can barely walk through that site. So planting along the creeks is so important in our temperature limited systems and as food for wildlife. What could live in that reed canary grass system before? Not much. Maybe some frogs, very sadly, but their eggs would just get washed down the stream. So, and then here's this video. Oh, it might not work. I'll go here. Nope. Oh. So this is that same site too, where, and the landowner here is like so interactive with us and really has done a lot of work too. I don't want to neglect saying that, but this is that same site this spring where you can really see the water is spreading across the whole inset floodplain. Those plants are being inundated with water, which is really cool. And this was taken by Aaron Rosenblum from Cascade Fisheries, and they did a little snorkel of the area and they saw fish utilizing the floodplain. And not really around the BDA, but just being able to harvest little baby fish, being to go for more area on the floodplain where there's more bugs and other food for them is pretty awesome. Oh. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael, but you know, all these projects that I mentioned, they are on private property. So it is so wonderful to work with such wonderful landowners who really just want to do what's best for the land and for the community, because it's such a good benefit to everyone. I don't know, Michael.
Look at that. And yeah, and I talked about wildlife earlier, and I could go off and rattle off a list of all the wildlife species that are benefited by beavers, but I think it would be better to show you. So these are all game camera photos that we've taken by the project, or that were taken by the project. So I think one of the coolest ones, well, there's a lot of cool images here, but you see the one with the bear in it. If you can read the temperature in the top right, it says 109 degrees Fahrenheit. So these ponds are essential for wildlife to seek refuge in the summertime. You know, we're seeing otters at these sites. We're seeing use by deer. I mean, that's such a cute little pond there. And then one of the coolest pictures that we got this last fall was of an endangered fisher, right? And that's so just awesome to see these animals using these beaver sites. And I wish I had more game camera pictures to show you. I just have thousands of them, and it would have taken me a year to produce this presentation if I got them all. But you know, ducks, birds, amphibians, everything benefits from having beavers on the landscape. And I think, you know, maybe we shouldn't just view it as they benefit from having beavers on the landscape, but they evolved with beavers on the landscape. And so by restoring these processes, we're restoring habitat for not just aquatic species, but for a whole host of upland species too.
Here's a historical photo, the only one I could really find of water on the chumstick, but so weird. But I don't know where on the chumstick that is, if anyone has any thoughts. But yeah, thank y'all so much. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, it was a great presentation. Go for it. Ask away.
So the BVAs that you were talking about that your group makes, are there any like beavers that have been reintroduced to those regions? Like, are there landowners that want the, you know, once you get your thing started, and then can you get a beaver in there?
That's funny. I'll take part of that and then I'll let you handle the rest. Yeah, we have a lot of landowners that love beavers. We have a lot of landowners that don't love beavers, and we have a lot of landowners that love beavers that beavers wouldn't be good there. So we have not had any relocations happen at any of our sites, but I know it's something that TU is considering. which Michael can talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, so some projects use BDAs as a way to restore a stream to a point where it would be good for beavers. You know, we can't just throw a beaver in a really shallow stream and expect it to stay and survive. We need to make it a little bit nice for them. And by building a little dam for them, it gives them a spot to start building on. So you take beavers out of their home, you bring them to the hatchery, you bring them out to a release site. That's kind of a scary deal for them. But we're making a really nice spot for them when we release them, and so that they can sit there, have an anchoring point for their dam. And in some cases, we don't even need to do the relocating to these sites, and the beavers will find them on their own. You know, they're so keyed into what habitat is good for them. We've had beavers move into our BDA sites after implementation. So that Potato Creek example is perfect. Following implementation, we had a family of beavers move upstream of the structures there. And something really cool about Potato Creek is that everyone up the Entiat tells me about how there used to be beavers up Potato Creek, or there used to be beavers up Roaring Creek, or there used to be beavers up Crum Canyon or Mud Creek or whatever, but there aren't anymore. And so we're restoring this habitat. So maybe someday we can bring these beavers back there.
I have a question on mine. Beavers build multiple dams, and each dam and water within those areas serve different purposes. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Maybe if I can resay it.
Yeah.
What are different purposes that different dams have in that ecosystem that beavers create?
I don't know if I'm going to do a great job answering this question, which is bad
I have a
form, but
thought too.
you have a thought too.
Yeah.
One thing that I do know is that beavers will have their like main spot. And so they'll build their big dam and then have tertiary dams off of that. And so as they're, you know, using up resources in one spot, even though they are farming their food, they can eat themselves out of house and home. And that often happens. But by building these other dams and having these like little project sites, they can keep moving upstream and downstream, and especially for dispersal of young. Right. So the young stay with the family for 2 years and then they go off on their own. And so they're going to go away from the complex and maybe build another dam downstream.
Yeah, and I both Michael and I neglected to mention this too. When we're doing our BDA projects, we try to put in a lot, and we try to put in a lot of linear feet of them, because these structures, they just don't do well with just one. You need to have a series of them, because we can only build them so big too with our regulations that we have, and you know, lucky good for those regulations. And so we're trying to put in as many as we can have, which beavers also do to some degree too.
Yeah, I mean, you see it around here sometimes. I'm from back east and I worked in Pennsylvania for a time, and the streams that I would go hang out at on my days off were these beaver complexes that were miles long. I mean, dam after dam after dam, and just these insane wetland complexes. And so they're just, you know, like I mentioned earlier, they're not very good on land. They need to make their habitat. And so by building dams, and as they have more babies, they have to build more habitat, just to have more access to their food resources. Yeah, go for it.
Are those BDAs built strictly with just natural things? No, I mean, no plastic or
No,
metals.
we try.
Well, we do use like a
Oh yeah.
Well, no,
but
The equipment.
yeah, the equipment.
but there's nothing woven that
Mm-mm.
degrades over.
Yeah, it's all, and we try to use material on site or nearby. A lot of
Yeah.
okay.
Oh no, go for it.
Where a lot of our weave material, some of those systems where there's absolutely no vegetation along the banks. One of the components of Cascadia Conservation District is a forest health program. So we work with a lot of landowners that are thinning out their forests. And so we use those trees that they're cutting down, the limbs that they're thinning, all that firewising that our neighbors are doing. We're trying to incorporate back into our streams that are so wood limited. So, yeah.
And you know, something that I was talking about earlier, how we want these to be features of the stream, right? We want the stream to take them over, and we want to adaptively manage these structures too. So we put in our BDAs, we don't just say, see you later, we're not putting any more. And I alluded to a phase 2 on Potato Creek. So we put in those BDAs, did what we could in 2020, and then we came back after seeing what those structures did to add more. And so that's, you know, by having the stream just kind of eat the BDAs and incorporate it into the system, we're able to go back and add more.
You're not moving problem beavers to your BDAs. Where do they go?
So I mentioned earlier that we have a model that we use for remote surveying of these streams. And so we're looking for, it's called the BRAT model, which stands for the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool. And it takes in a bunch of characteristics, things like vegetation, the slope of the stream power, and I think I'm missing a couple, but that's pretty much the gist. And it ranks a stream based on how many dams per kilometer it could support if beavers were there. And so we use this model as a preliminary screening feature. Then we'll go out in the field and assess this. And we have a scorecard from WDFW that we'll go through and we'll, check boxes. Does it have a pool over 3 feet deep? Does it have wood in the stream? Does it have enough food? Does it have enough cover? And after we've gone through this checklist, we'll get a score. And depending on what the score is, will tell us whether or not we can release a beaver there. It's pretty obvious, though, when you're seeing good beaver habitat. Yeah, Margie.
It sounds like you're mostly relocating live beavers to more wild areas, and where you use the BDAs is more focused on areas that have been impacted by humans already. Is that correct?
It's kind of a little bit of both. Definitely with the beavers.
Is there any overlap where you've moved beavers to more human impacted areas, or you put BDAs in more wild areas?
The BDAs in more wild areas is what we do, because you're still seeing degraded systems, because even though it looks like a wild system, at some point it was impacted by people.
200 years ago, and now it's become a degraded.
Yeah, and I can pick a few old growth trees that I know of in the upper Wenatchee, but there aren't that many. So you're seeing a lot of younger forests. And so you're missing a lot of those components that would have been there historically, like the large wood and all that. And so we do a lot of work in the upper Wenatchee area on forest land building BDAs. We try to move our beavers as far away from people as we can. One, we don't want them getting back in conflict with humans, but also we want the beavers to be able to live out their lives how they want to do it. There have been some landowners, though, that have been really jones and they get a beaver, and we're trying to figure out, if that's possible. And I think if you're on the Leavenworth Facebook group, of the chumpstick beaver, and that beaver is doing really well in a more human occupied space. Yep, primarily Forest Service land.
Yeah.
It seems like you talked about you're doing things for climate change and stuff, and you did mention biodiversity, but it seems like those two things together as two of the most important things we've got to address like right now. And it seems like beavers are the best solution for that everywhere. It's like it's like the world with beavers.
That's what I think.
Yeah. The trouble is they're really hard to breed them.
Is it?
Yeah.
But if you give them that.
Someone has asked me if I wanted to start a beaver hatchery. I don't think I'm going to start doing that, but that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
They mate for life, and they can have multiple litters, and so they're I think it's probably around 10 years. I think in captivity, like if you pay attention to the Portland Zoo, they have Filbert, the branch manager. I think that beaver is close to 15 years old. So in captivity, they're going to live longer. But beavers are having multiple litters throughout their lifetime.
We live on a small island, and you have a few families of beavers on that island, and they instantly become problems. Just a couple of landowners that want them, and the rest don't. Beavers that have to be moved. It seems like that would be that you've got to get. I guess, but you want to get some families. You can't just take the young.
Yeah.
Well, and the young will disperse. So sometimes we do just catch the subadults that are making it on their own. And sometimes we'll try to mate a pair. If we catch a male and a female, we'll introduce them together and make sure they get along, and we'll release them as a pair. And we've actually had some really great success doing that, where we had a mom and a kit, so a mom and a baby. And then we had this male that wasn't matched. We're able to pair them together, and they actually did really well and built some awesome dams.
And do that work with people that work in.
Yeah, it's a pretty awesome network. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I know that some beavers are at work just north of Blackbird Island here in town. So what would they be doing there? I mean, there's no real, there's some I mean, the river's really big there, right? So
Yeah, so we have a lot of these big river beavers and they're not going to be building dams, although we had a group of beavers build a dam across Main Stem Mason Creek in the fall, and that was incredible. It was awesome. But, we were talking about all this large wood. Sometimes you'll see a giant cottonwood that is toppled over by a beaver and think, why did a beaver chew that down? Well, all the tender buds and leaves at the top are what they're eating. So they're cutting these trees down, dropping them in the river. They're eating what they can, but then they're also putting that large wood into the system. So, if you can recall to one of the early slides saying how these streams and rivers were just like these large complexes of wood rafts and all that, that wood had to come from somewhere. And not all of it was beavers, obviously, but beavers definitely contribute to the wood loading in streams, even big rivers.
Do you ever get in any conflicts with kayakers or rafters? They're trying to use creeks and they're getting stopped up by the BFDs or beaver dams?
No, we haven't, but I think for like larger in-stream restoration projects, they take
Yeah.
into account the recreational use,
Yeah.
if you're doing a project in the Wenatchee River, you don't want to put a strainer in there that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what
And so that's definitely taken into account on the streams that we're doing BDAs in and releasing into. They're pretty small.
You couldn't get down them in a kayak.
You could try. That would be kind of fun.
Some of our sites, one of the landowners, he really wants to take his rowboat down. And so we've kind of made it where he could almost like widen it out.
That's
but
pretty awesome.
yeah, it's like a small, like, 800 linear feet, but here,
how far up, Eagle Creek Road did you work?
oh yeah, so we have a couple sites on Eagle. Let's see. So right around the 2.3 mile markers, two wonderful landowners that we're working with, and we're starting a new site this summer, closer to the 1.5 mile marker. There's a group of landowners there too that are so great. So, oh, great. Maybe you want to jump on board too. But-
What's the permitting process for the BDA?
Great.
You'd probably be
question.
better at answering that. but-
Yeah, sure. It's, it depends, I guess. But our process, and for our smaller creeks and streams, we work really closely with WDFW, assessing the sites prior to applying for the permit. But it is a habitat restoration project, so it's a little bit less strenuous as some of the other like fish barrier removal projects, or any of those other like more intense in stream regrading or whatever. So it's a habitat improvement project. So we do go and get a permit with WDFW, and then we do a federal permit as well and work with the Army Corps of Engineers. It can take a while sometimes, especially a lot of Leavenworth area is actually in the FEMA floodplain. Maybe some of y'all live in the FEMA floodplain. And of course, that's assessed at a completely different level than outside of the floodplain. So it kind of depends. It can be quite difficult. But WDFW, our habitat bios our permitters that we work with, they're amazing. They just want to see these rivers in a better place too. And so it's pretty enjoyable to work with them, as well as the Army Corps. They just are smothered with work. So, I'm just lucky that we have good people just trying to get through it.
And if you happen to own some property on a creek and really want some BDAs on your property, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk through some options for you.
Yeah.
Is up the fluid, I remember the name of the creek, I want to say Blue Creek. I watched the beaver and beaver dam, and I stopped, and they turned into 7 beaver dams.
Oh,
And
cool.
then they decided to flood the culvert. And then I didn't see the beaver anymore, and I always wondered what happened to it. And now there's another one up by Minerals. You can see when you're going over the pass.
Oh, that's awesome. I try to keep my fingers on the pulse of all active beavers. And so I'm like, filling up a list in my head of where I know they're at.
That's what National Forest, right? So is that a different entity than you guys?
Yeah, so that would be the Forest Service, but I mean, they're one of our project partners, and Michael works very closely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
We can tell.
yeah.
when was that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I've only been on the project for about 1.5 years. Then I didn't move them.
It was.
Well, it could have been, you know, some of our predecessors moving them. There,
The whole, there was a Forest Service road that went off the highway and that whole area got flooded, backing up over the culvert.
and you know, sometimes if they just blow up the culvert or blow up the dam a few times, the beavers will just kind of get disheartened and leave, and they'll go find a new spot. Unfortunately, though, one of
Cool.
oh, that's awesome. They definitely could have. They definitely could have. Sweet.
Well, thanks very much, guys. This
Thank
was
you.
a wonderful. Welcome back to Bird Fest.
I'll be on the Potato Creek tours, and
Yeah.
Alex will be on the Eagle Creek tour.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Thank you.